If I ever make somebody upset as me, as skill-based matchmaking makes Troy upset, I have done something very wrong. I would never want someone to dislike and hate me as much as Troy hates skill-based matchmaking. That would frighten me.
How's it going, everyone? I recently conducted a never before done experiment where I created a brand new DBD account and tracked my MMR, which is the hidden rating behavior uses to matchmake you with similarly skilled players. I did this from the starting point of 650 MMR all the way up to the maximum hard cap of 2100 MMR. During this process, I learned a lot of things that I want to share with the community and hopefully open a discourse about a few eye-opening revelations. So in this video, I'm going to explain how I did this. I'm going to discuss the things we learned and ideally inspire more people to try out this experiment for themselves so they can see firsthand what I'm talking about and see if they come to the same conclusions that I have. If you are interested in a specific part of the video, please use the timestamps to jump straight to it. Also, make sure to slap the like button in the mouth as it really does help out the channel. So to start, let me address how I was able to actually calculate this, because obviously MMR is completely hidden. So through my contacts who make hacks for the game that I often talk to here on the channel, one of which hacks is an MMR tracker that shows them the MMR not only of themselves, but of everyone they play with. They also will make killer bots that you've probably seen that will constantly farm to max MMR. So they can then get on those accounts at a later time and use them to stream snipe popular content creators, right? So they're just constantly farming data about how MMR is calculated. And up until recently, a lot of this information was actually available on the official Dead by Daylight wiki page, but it has since been removed because of basically never-ending complaining from the community on the accuracy of it. Unfortunately, a lot of people want to use MMR as a weapon or a shield to defend or make an argument that supports their own personal view of DBD, and since MMR is hidden, they're basically allowed to do that for free. And since the wiki page had the actual numbers posted of how it worked, that upset a lot of people enough to the point where they went and harassed the wiki contributors to the point of them just straight up hiding the information as well, which is pathetic and sad, but definitely not that surprising. That said, I am still privy to that information, and my only goal is to understand how MMR is actually working behind the scenes. I just want to understand the system and see how it lines up with what I think. So this is the math. I made a new account. That account starts at 650 MMR. For every 4K I gain, by 4K I mean getting 4 kills, I gain 20 MMR. For a 3K, I gain 10 MMR. For a 2K, I gain 0 MMR, so no change. For a 1K, I lose 10 MMR. And for a 0K where all 4 survivors escape, I lose 20 MMR. That's the rough math, but there are variables as well. The longer a match goes on, up to a maximum of 10 minutes, the more MMR is affected. So for example, if I get a 4K at 10 minutes or anywhere after 10 minutes, it just caps out at 10 minutes, I get 20 MMR. But if the match only lasted 7 minutes, it is possible I could get 18 MMR. So that's one variable. Another variable depends on the MMR rating of both the killer and the survivors in a match. So it's basically impossible to account for these with pinpoint accuracy since it is hidden. So for this experiment, we kept it nice and simple and only used the 4 main MMR change outcomes mentioned before, between -20 up to +20. Now, because of these variables, I thought that this experiment might be too inconsistent or possibly not even work at all. Yet that's not the case. In fact, it was actually crazy how clear it was what MMR I was playing at all times, with the exception of some very obvious and rare smurfs that we did encounter. Now, if you don't believe me, simply try the experiment yourself. Otherwise, your opinion isn't very insightful, right? I know already there will be a lot of people who don't believe me, even though I have the entire 7-day stream available to watch, but instead of just pretending you know more about MMR, do the experiment yourself and see what happens, because nobody is interested in actually. So these are the official MMR brackets. I labeled them with a name to make it more user friendly, but this is completely real. I did not make this up. You start in bronze tier at 650 MMR. Often I refer to this as the testing bracket because you are being tracked here. If the system sees you're dominating too hard, they kind of have like a Smurf protection mechanic, and it works pretty fast. After 5 4Ks in a row, the system will automatically boost you up to the silver bracket at 900 MMR. The hacker groups confirm this. Their killer bots always have this happen to them. So unfortunately, I only got a small sample of this MMR bracket, but what I noticed in those 5 matches were interesting. Nobody gave up. They all tried to win until they died. The gen speed was insanely slow. I'm talking 10 minutes without a gen popping, like abysmally slow gens. Surprisingly though, most players at this level were still using very strong perks. Like, the meta is pretty solidified across the board, and I do just find that kind of funny. Then we have silver tier, 900 MMR. Here is what I would call solo queue hell. My matches were pretty typical of what you expect when you solo queue. Survivors constantly giving up, rage quitting, a very mixed bag where there's legitimately really good players here, but their teammates are just kind of useless. Super easy to get rid of them like at any point of the match. And this is really alarming because the biggest population of DBD players exists within this skill bracket, but they'll never really realize that, right? They're seeing meta perks, sweaty playstyles very consistently, so they have no idea just how much sweatier the game actually gets at the highest MMR, because they already believe they're probably not necessarily max MMR, but somewhere within the top bracket, and they're just not. In the top bracket, it is very typical for 2 to 3 gens to pop in the first chase, whereas in the silver bracket, I was still able to play very chill, use basic add-ons, go for multiple chases, and still win comfortably. Finally, let's talk about the gold bracket. The gold bracket used to be split into 2 brackets, but behavior widened it, so now it's much larger. It spans 700 MMR, which is pretty wild, because at the low end of gold tier, you still see a decently mixed bag of players. Much sweatier than silver tier, but still a lot of human players at the entry level of gold tier. However, once you cross like the 1900 MMR mark, the game turns into a quasi tournament every match. Now, this is primarily where I believe the mindset of MMR doesn't exist gets bred, because when you have killers or survivors that are playing at a tournament level every match because of MMR that are in the same bracket with players who just happen to have maybe gotten out of silver tier, there's an astronomical difference in skill level between these 2 groups of players. But if, for example, I search as a 2100 killer and there just happens to be no survivors searching above 1600 MMR, then I'll get matched with those survivors instantly. That's what being in the same bracket means, right? Like, there's still a ladder and it will still always try to prioritize the most similar team to you so that the MMR matches up as equally as it can, but that's obviously not always going to be possible, right? Like, sometimes there's going to be too many killers with high MMR searching and you're going to get a lower MMR team that's within the same bracket as you instantly. It's not even going to have to expand like it would normally if you were playing like 2v8 or something, and it has to wait for the matchmaking parameters to expand and go down to like silver tier and then start to grab those players. Like, when you're in the same bracket, it will grab those players instantly if there's nobody else available. And for whatever reasons, the gold bracket has a safety net, meaning if you're losing a lot of matches, the MMR system will purposely lower your MMR loss so that it's much more difficult for you to drop out of the gold bracket. So once you're there, it's very difficult to drop back to the silver bracket, and you pretty much have to do it intentionally. So this is why I always tell people that MMR works perfectly until it doesn't, because if you're a 1600 MMR survivor playing solo queue, of course you're going to be conditioned to believe MMR is not working. You're going to be thinking, how can I be consistently match after match paired with the sweatiest killers every game if MMR actually exists, right? But in the bigger picture, that killer just played 5 tournament matches in a row, and now suddenly they're playing against a solo queue team at much lower MMR, even though it's within the same gold bracket. So the outcome is obvious, right? They come in overcompensating and obliterate the solo queue team. Now, according to Behavior, they track the top 5% of MMR players. And based on my experiment, I would speculate that this is the players that exist between the 1900 to 2100 MMR, or at the very least, very close to that. Now, the implication of that is pretty wild when you stop to think about it. It means the absolute vast majority of the player base does not realize just how sweaty DBD can truly be. And unfortunately, that leads to a situation where it's incredibly difficult to have balanced conversations because the range of skill is so dramatic within the community. There's also the aspect of, do we want to balance the game around the top 5%? And if we do, how do we mitigate it so the experience isn't ruined for the rest of the player base, right? It's all just a very difficult thing to navigate. That said, the single most significant thing Behavior could do is make MMR finally visible. It is something that the community overwhelmingly wants. So why don't they do it? In my opinion, they hide MMR for 3 reasons. The first reason is profit motive. Visual MMR makes casual players upset. They don't like to see it. If they're upset, they're less likely to buy cosmetics, profits go down. So, okay, fair enough. What's the solution? Make it optional. By default, MMR can be hidden, but if you want it on so you can see your MMR as well as the MMR of the players you are playing against, you can go into the options and turn it on. It's really that simple. The second reason, Behavior purposely wants to dampen the voice of players in the top bracket. If MMR was visible, people naturally would listen to those with the highest MMR because they have the most credibility when it comes to talking about balance. Behavior does not want the sweatiest people in the community to have a louder voice than anyone else, most importantly them. And that segues to our last reason. Hidden MMR makes Behavior's job infinitely easier. They get to control the narrative, they can give us useless and manipulative stats that literally don't mean anything. They get the loudest voice when it comes to design and balance changes. But believe this, if MMR was not detrimental to the game, Behavior would not hide it. Developers hide things for a reason. It's the same reason Overwatch and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre both removed the feature to see who's partied up in a lobby, because they know that pre-made groups always have a significant advantage. So instead of addressing that using a creative idea, they just hide the information instead because it's easier. It's why Behavior refuses to show who's in a Swift, and it's the same line of logic used when hiding MMR. If MMR was visible, then Behavior would have to be much more accountable. If MMR was visible, players would have to take accountability for their own skill issues. If MMR was visible, players in lower brackets would have to accept that their view of balance might not be as accurate as they previously thought, right? Now, I did this experiment on EU servers almost entirely over the night, so somewhere between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Region and time of day dramatically affect the overall experience, so if anyone replicates this experiment, it's important to take note of that. My final takeaway is basically that the majority of the DBD community doesn't truly understand how competitive the game really is, and as long as we have hidden MMR, we'll never be able to have an earnest conversation about the overall state of the game or where it should go. If you would like to watch my full video about the gameplay aspect of this experiment, you could check out my full video on it here. Otherwise, I do very much appreciate you watching, especially all the way to the end, as this was a very time-consuming experiment. Let me know what you think about visible MMR being added to DBD, and as always, have a good one.